Jumping into a new market, it's one of the riskiest, highest-stakes moves a company can possibly make. It feels like a massive gamble. But what if there was a way to stack the odds in your favor? Well, today we're going to break down a really solid two-part blueprint designed to do just that. Let's get into how you can turn that gamble into a calculated win.
So this is what you're up against. A dense, dynamic, and let's be honest, often volatile environment. You've got regulatory hurdles. You've got currency risks. You've got intense competition. Just showing up and hoping for the best, that is not a strategy. It's a recipe for disaster. So, how do you do it? That's the big question, right? How do you cut through all of that noise? How do you go from just entering a market to actually conquering it?
And the answer, it turns out, is this really powerful two-part blueprint. First, you have to build the architecture of your analysis. We call that your evidence pack. And second, you've got to design a high-impact report to actually win the argument. See, it's not just about having the right facts, it's about making those facts completely impossible to ignore.
So, let's start with part one, building the evidence pack. This is your foundation. It's the absolute bedrock of your entire strategy. But remember, success here isn't about having the most data. It's about curating a very precise and powerful toolkit of proof.
At the heart of this toolkit, you're basically triangulating evidence from three key pillars: the company, the country, and the industry. You know, analyzing any one of these in a vacuum is a huge mistake. Real strategic proof, the kind you can bet on, comes from understanding how all three interact.
All right, so let's dig into each of these pillars. We're going to interrogate the evidence and see how an absolutely airtight case is built step by step.
First up, Pillar I, the company's DNA. And this is all about looking past the slick marketing slogans and the polished presentations to understand what the company's core reality really is, what it's actually capable of doing.
Now, this is a really cool idea. It's called a source hierarchy. That flashy investor deck you see, that's the sales pitch. But the annual report, that's where you find the truth, the structural risks, the real operational mechanics. The deeper you go, from marketing to audited financials, the closer you get to the actual truth.
And this leads to a super important technique called gap analysis. You take the company's claim, the theory, and you audit it against the hard evidence. So they say there's a low-cost leader? Great. Does their annual report show the margins to back that up? This is exactly where strategic theories either prove themselves or just fall apart. Okay, next up is Pillar 2, the country's terrain. This is all about the external environment, the institutional rules, and the macro volatility that you have absolutely no control over. These are the rules of the game.
And this part is absolutely critical. We call this the regulatory cage. These are hard, binary constraints. Can foreigners own more than 49% of a company? It's a yes or no question. Are there local content rules? Yes or no? If your big strategy violates one of these, the case fails immediately. It's a deal-breaker check you have to do right at the beginning.
Finally, we get to Pillar 3, the industry's battlefield. You've looked at yourself, you've looked at the environment, now it's time to analyze the competition.
The key thing to remember here is that in a saturated market, growth is pretty much a zero-sum game. If you're planning to grow, you have to know exactly who you're taking market share from. Who's the leader? Who are the scrappy challengers? Where's the opening? You absolutely have to map the terrain of the battlefield.
So, you've done the work. You've built your three pillars of proof. You've got a mountain of evidence. You're feeling good. But, and this is a huge but, evidence on its own is not enough.
And that brings us to the second and equally critical part of the blueprint. You have to win the argument. This is all about turning that mountain of evidence into a story that is so clear and so compelling that nobody can ignore it.
And the guiding principle for this is called bluff, bottom line up front. You start with the answer. Don't build up to some dramatic reveal at the end. State the problem, give your recommendation, and explain why, all in the first 200 words. This frames absolutely everything that follows. It is the answer, not a teaser.
The next rule means you have to be ruthless. Think of context as a filter, not a history lesson. If a fact, no matter how interesting it is, does not directly support your strategic recommendation, it gets cut. You have to be that precise. Precision is power.
The whole philosophy is simple, but it is so powerful. The goal isn't just to be right, it's to be so clear that your argument becomes undeniable. In other words, simple, brutal, effective.
Okay, so we have our two blueprints, one for building evidence,
one for making the argument. Now let's connect them. How does all that proof you gathered actually fuel the report? Well, that happens in what we call the engine room.
And here you can see that connection in action. All that evidence you gathered on the company, the country, and the industry becomes the direct input for the 6 core parts of your analysis, from market conditions and your firm's advantage all the way to the value chain and risk assessment. The proof you built is literally the fuel for the engine that drives your final recommendation.
So here it is, the full evidence checklist at a glance. You're auditing the company, you're mapping the country's rules, and you're analyzing the industry's battlefield. A really thorough check across all 3 of these is completely non-negotiable. You know, you can think of this whole process like a pilot's pre-flight checklist. From that executive summary all the way to the final recommendation, following this structure makes sure that every single critical component is in place before you commit to a major strategic launch. You wouldn't skip a step there, and you don't skip one here. So in the end, it all boils down to this simple, powerful 2-step process. Number 1, build your proof with the 3 pillars framework. Number 2, win the argument by structuring that proof for brutal clarity. That right there, that's the blueprint for success.
This framework really demystifies one of the most complex, high-stakes decisions in business. It turns all that chaos into a clear, repeatable process for victory. So the only question left is, with this blueprint, what market will you go out and conquer next?